Thank you very much. We have heard an awful lot today from some excellent speakers, and I'd like to just draw a few of those quickly together before I start. Secretary Rudd spoke of it being in a sweet spot between clean energy and economics, but I think the advent of new engineering and technology, clean energy puts us in a sweet spot between Indigenous relationships, economics, and clean energy. Russell Blades talked about a domino effect of staying with a diesel dependence. I hope to show a domino effect from a social standpoint of not following the advent of technology and where it can take us. Quickly, last but not least, in the round table here, Don Bubar mentioned Billy Diamond and Robert Bourassa and their visionary changing of northern Quebec. And I'd like to say that that ties into my talk, which is the CSR, and we do pay homage to what they achieved. I'd like to talk about the inclusion of the economy and the First Nations. I'm just going to bring my, speaking of cell phones, somebody mentioned how they're all over the world. I'm just going to bring my talk up on my cell phone so I don't have to look over my shoulder here. Okay, solving energy problems in remote communities through ownership. We are a small junior exploration company that sits next to a 5 million ounce discovery that has been announced that it will come into production as a production decision at the New Orleans Gold Show. First Mine Financial has announced that that's their decision. Our company has enjoyed an excellent relationship with the First Nations. To see how we got there, the premise, the renewable energy should be 100% First Nation controlled in northern communities. The mine site partnerships for the future. First Nations at the moment in northwestern Ontario are no different than mine sites. They're 100% diesel dependent. The reliance of diesel dependence is the #1 problem that they face. It's energy, not water, and housing, because energy comes first. So how did we get here, and what is the path forward? Orecrest Gold signed an agreement with Cat Lake First Nation to develop 40 megawatts of clean energy, providing for 100% energy ownership for Cat Lake. The result of leaving the First Nations out of 300 years of wealth creation is the moment in time that this clean energy technology arrives in the mining cycle. We in Canada believe that the First Nations, we heard from Secretary Rudd, will be the #1 issue for this term of our government. Ownership and executive responsibility in their resources in this case means handling their energy needs on their own. If we look at a 40 megawatt renewable energy plan for 5 million ounces of gold, it will use every kilowatt of that 40 megawatts. What it leaves behind is ownership of an asset that the First Nations can then control themselves. If we train them and it's good. I'm not arguing with training them for jobs in mines, but the mine, when it's closed, it's not a community that's likely to move to Saskatchewan or to Venezuela for its next job. It's a community that would like to stay there, and the electricity that's left behind becomes the component for the sustainability of that community. I think I've covered that slide. How did we get here in our relationship with the First Nations? Orecrest has taken the duty to consult and accommodate a little further. The First Nations have invested $500,000 into our exploration programs. One of their community members has come on our board of directors, Chris Anjikaneb. He's been there since 2011. He's now our Vice President of Business Development. And through his participation, when we partnered with the First Nations for exploration, what we've found since is that the business opportunities go far beyond exploration and have now included the 40 megawatt LOI for clean energy. So if you embrace the local community for one purpose, you can find that your business model grows through your relationships with them. In 2013, I did a little bit better of a job speaking on a panel than my rough start here. But that was in Ottawa with the interim leader of the Liberal Party, and we had proposed a First Nations wealth fund to the previous administration. It's our understanding that that model, which was written with the help of some senior financial experts in Toronto, had made it as far as the Prime Minister's office and his desk, but it was turned down. So we continued to look for ways to build some financial resources around the First Nations communities. Christopher's community invested $500,000. Two other communities, one of them being Cat Lake and Slate Falls, came forward and said, William, we'd like to do the same thing. We looked at their communities, and they hadn't run a balanced budget in almost their existence. So we couldn't accept even $50,000 as a token participation because they don't have the money. So one of the first struggles was, where do we find capital for the First Nations to participate? The First Nations Wealth Fund is something that I will come back to. The path forward. These diesel-dependent communities, again, they cannot move forward. There's a community that requires 700,000 liters of diesel a year. That's not going to be allowed to be doubled to 1.4 million and put fuel farms in and new generators. All of that fuel goes up an ice road. Last year, the ice roads were open for just a little over 2 weeks, close to 3 weeks. So only the absolute necessities were sent up, i.e. diesel, though Ontario ratepayers have buried deep, deep in that rate the cost of flying fuel into many of these communities for most of this year, because we didn't get the required diesel in. So if we're looking also on the environmental side, we're talking about the cost of moving diesel in. So I guess one of the things I'm trying to say is that not just should the miners be considering what's in it for them and how their social license operates, but look at it from another side. The advent of this technology allows us here in Canada, certainly, to address a problem we haven't been able to come up with a solution with yet, and that's 100% ownership, such as in northern Quebec, which had the enormous benefit of the James Bay Power Project. Here we can begin that with these smaller communities. We have the Ring of Fire coming up, 130 years of the world's stainless steel, or chromite, It's most likely, as miners know, going to be much larger than that. We just haven't put the cost in of drilling up the requirement. We have talked to those communities about this model. Again, the necessity that they can bring in the electricity they need. The federal government put $9 billion up, but every single community up there is in an energy deficit. So if you can't put in water treatment, if you can't put in housing, none of that $9 billion is much more than an election plank, because without the electricity, no community can survive. And that often comes into the conversation with people, well, what are they doing there? Well, with the advent of this type of electricity and this type of engineering, because really technology is just engineering, we now can address that project. From Thompson, Manitoba to the Ring of Fire and south to Thunder Bay is one of the most prospective mineral territories in the world, and one of the least looked at, actually. Those remote communities are often feared by financiers. What's going to happen if they don't give you a license to operate? These sorts of relationships and this kind of model goes an awful long way to addressing that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, really, the community receives a long-term power purchase agreement. The mining company receives a line item. We've heard all of these points actually have been covered by the previous talks. Economic stability, long-term energy provides micro to macro economic growth. These communities cannot look at any sort of local economy. We all talk about greenhouses, and they are an exceptional example of what could happen if the communities had excess electricity. You can put greenhouses behind high schools. You can train people. People can go there. Chris, my business partner, opened the Tim Hortons franchise in Sioux Lookout for Lac Seul with the mandate that they would not put any of the money in the top end of band council, but any excess money that Tim Hortons made went to hiring more part-time band members, young people off the reserve. Those young people are going to jobs after school and on weekends, and they're coming home to the reserve with paychecks, and that's changing the entire dynamic of Lac Seul. At the same time, Chris's vision, he negotiated the agreement for Lac Seul with Goldcorp. It's a 20-year settlement with his community. I believe Goldcorp brought Chris to their annual meeting in Vancouver, and he sat on the dais with the board of directors. They were so happy with they were satisfied with the end result. And so we're looking at local leadership joining our company, and the end result being that the things I'm talking about right now are a participatory corporate responsibility. In a way, I'm an advocate here, a corporate advocate for the First Nations, because they're one of my largest shareholders. They're on my board of directors, and they have an energy deficit or situation of diesel dependence and that domino effect that every mine is facing right now. I'm greatly encouraged by the I Am Gold talk. As everybody who's coming up here agrees, with Jaime, who said that by 2030, the largest supplier for humanity will be renewables replacing coal, so that everything will be running on renewables shortly. The mining involvement is that great example of remote opportunity. Quickly, because I will just wrap it up, but where we are, we're adjacent to a 5 million ounce discovery between Red Lake and Pickle Lake. The engineers tell us that that development will use every kilowatt of 40 megawatts. It looks like we have a very promising discovery right next door. It will be a gold camp, as announced at the New Orleans Gold Show. And so the First Nations 40 megawatts will be an excellent example, hopefully, in 3 to 5 years at this show, perhaps. We can see if, a power purchase agreement with the local people where the energy is left in an industrial site after the mine is exhausted allows them to do all sorts of other things. Lac Seul, Cat Lake, Slate Falls have their forest management rights now from the government. And they'd also like to look at a biomass opportunity because they have to file a forest management plan. Weyerhaeuser and Domtar take that wood and turn it into tissue paper and toilet paper, and it's a very small margin, but they're a giant corporation. Now that these communities have their rights, they need something that they can file with the government that's viable, and that they are all looking at biomass as well. But then that comes into carbon credits and forest renewal and these sorts of things. The creative answer is a post-tribal society, First Nations clean energy and 100% ownership in northwestern Ontario. The Federal First Nation Wealth Fund is modeled after the QPP. I won't get into that. That's a bit of a relic from a previous talk. It is very important to this, but did we lose the last slide? Oh, no. Sorry.
Yeah, don't press.
Don't press. Okay. The last slide just goes to my own vision. Sorry. I can share it with you later. Thank you very much.